That series of reports on corruption in Arizona that the other day linked Senator Barry Goldwater to mob figures, today said that Goldwater's brother Robert maintains business and social relationships with several mobsters. The investigation was conducted by reporters from 24 newspapers and 2 broadcast stations. But not even all of those organizations have been running the series. And in Phoenix, as Sharon Lovejoy reports, the investigation is hardly getting any coverage.
Throughout the United States, the series of reports alleging widespread criminal activity in Arizona has received modest circulation at best, and even less than that in Arizona itself. The state's largest newspapers, the Republic and the Gazette, have decided not to print the reports as a series, despite the fact that the murder of Don Bolles, longtime investigative reporter for the Republic, prompted the investigation. The newspapers say they've already published all the information in the report that could be verified. They say it would be irresponsible to publish unverified statements and allegations. In Tucson, the Arizona Daily Star is printing edited versions of the report, which has quickly become a bestseller in Phoenix. 5,000 copies a day are now being sold instead of the usual 300. Even the Maricopa County Young Democrats have been helping to distribute the Tucson paper. State Senator Sue Dye says that printing the story in only one major paper just isn't enough.
I think the Arizona Republic should particularly run the series, whether other papers do or not, because it concerns Arizona, it concerns Phoenix. They are a Pulliam paper. Indianapolis Star is a Pulliam paper, and if they can't substantiate it here, why could they there? It's the same chain.
The owners of the Pulliam newspaper chain have refused to comment on their decision. Phoenix television stations, forced to rely on wire service versions of the reports, unable to verify many of the allegations to their own satisfaction, have been reluctant to broadcast what they do not know to be true.
Cool News feels that publishing of such material would be irresponsibly inconsistent with prevailing standards of good journalism.
There is public pressure for the Phoenix papers to print the story, but like all news media in Arizona, they are trying to walk a fine line between responsible journalism and the suppression of information. Sharon Lovejoy, CBS News, Phoenix.
And that's the way it is. Thursday, March 17th, 1977. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
This has been the CBS.
In Phoenix, Arizona, a man named John Adamson goes on trial for the murder of Don Bolles, a reporter for the Arizona Republic. It's a trial that will receive national attention, not simply because Don Bolles was a reporter, but because he was murdered in Arizona. And because Don Bolles had a reputation for relentlessly pointing out that there was something rotten in the state of Arizona. Bolles is not the first person close to the story of corruption and fraud in Arizona to have died. In 5 years or so, a dozen murders, or at least mysterious deaths, have occurred. But Bolles is the first bystander to have been murdered. What was it that Bolles did? What was it that Don Bolles knew? What story was Bolles onto that made it necessary for someone to have him eliminated? And what is it about Arizona that makes fraud, corruption, and murder almost commonplace?
Arizona does not easily lose touch with its history. 5 times a day in Old Tucson, tourists are treated to a display of frontier justice. A Western movie in the flesh. But it may also tell you more about Arizona than the state boosters might want you to know.
You won't deal with me? Okay, here's my answer.
This is more than nostalgia. People still settle grudges the old way out here, but today's desperados may belong to the best families. And that's what this story is all about the possible link between the lowest street criminals and the pillars of Arizona society. The reason Arizona may have attracted so much evil is that it has so much good, so much of what millions of Americans are searching for. And so hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars have come into the state. That much money and this much land has led to fraud and corruption. Investigations either peter out or get called off, or they sometimes end in murder. It happened again last June. This is the parking lot of the Clarendon Hotel in downtown Phoenix, and the victim was Don Bolles, a 47-year-old reporter for the Arizona Republic. Bolles was lured here by a telephone call from a man who promised him details of a scandal involving prominent Arizona political figures. Bolles agreed to the rendezvous. He arrived, parked his car, went into the Clarendon, where he received another telephone call, apparently changing the meeting place. Bolles agreed to meet the man. He came back out here, got into his car, started it up, backed it out, and a bomb went off. Bolles survived the blast, but his arms and legs were shattered. The bomb went off just after 11:30 in the morning, almost, it seemed, to attract as much attention as possible. Almost, some say, to serve notice to the city of Phoenix. Don Bolles was one hell of a reporter, good enough anyway to have made a lot of enemies. For 10 years, he'd been exposing fraud and corruption. June 2nd, incidentally, was Don and Rosalie Bolles' wedding anniversary.
I got a phone call, and they said that Don had been hurt. I said, how bad is he hurt? And they said, well, the firemen are working on him, and they're taking him to St. Joseph's Hospital, and we'll be right out to get you. And 20 minutes later, I couldn't wait anymore, and I did drive myself down there, but it was several minutes before anyone talked to me to tell me exactly what was going on. And I probably didn't know that there was even a bomb involved for a good half hour, 45 minutes.
Did you talk to Don?
I didn't talk to Don until many, many hours later. I didn't even get to see him. He was in surgery for a long, long time.
What did he say when you talked to him?
He couldn't talk.
But lying wounded at the Clarendon, Don Bolles did manage a few words. They finally got me, he said. The Mafia, Emprise, find Adamson. The Mafia and Emprise we'll get to in a moment. John Harvey Adamson, 32, owner of some Greyhound racing dogs, a character known around the Phoenix bars, and the man who police say lured Don Bolles to the Clarendon. Police learned that weeks before the explosion, Adamson flew to San Diego, where, in this shop, he purchased a remote control device capable of detonating a charge from some distance. In his apartment, they found a booklet giving instructions on bomb making, and they found magnets and firecrackers, wire, and tape. By 10 days after the blast, both Don Bolles' legs and one arm had been amputated. The next day, 11 days after, Don Bolles died, and John Adamson was charged with murder. But no one in Arizona believes that whoever murdered Don Bolles acted alone. Everyone believes that the murderer was simply the trigger of a conspiracy. But a conspiracy by whom? Bolles had mentioned Mafia. He had written a series on organized crime, its connection with legitimate business, the land business, and the heroin business, the Mexican connection. Arizona has a long, tortuous border with Mexico, and the state has become a superhighway for brown Mexican heroin. 80% of the heroin used in the United States comes from Mexico. The traffic is next to impossible to stop. A long, unguarded border with only a fence to knock down. Tucson, only 60 miles from the border, may be the nation's chief drug distribution center. It is not, therefore, surprising that 200 figures connected with organized crime have moved into Arizona in recent years. That's the police estimate. People like Joe Bonanno, a man who police believe heads a crime syndicate stretching to the West Coast, a man said to be worth $1 billion. But he lives a modest suburban life in Tucson. And men like Peter Licavoli, reported to have run Detroit's Purple Gang, who lives on a ranch near Tucson. He once boasted he'd made more money in legitimate business in Arizona than he ever made in other ways. Bolles had also mentioned Emprise. Emprise, now known as RamCorp, is a sports corporation based in Buffalo, New York. It has connections with dog tracks in Arizona and runs food and liquor concessions. Emprise is being investigated for possible dealings with organized crime, and Bolles had written a number of stories about their operations. But Bolles' most spectacular stories over the years were investigations and revelations involving land fraud, swindles that have been measured in the billions of dollars. So much money and so many reputations to protect that just as police might have cracked a major land fraud case, a star witness, Ed Lazar, the accountant for a number of dubious land companies, was murdered in a Phoenix parking garage. The murderer was never caught. Phoenix police are reviewing every story Don Bolles wrote, seeking some clue to the murder. For 2 years, Bolles had been off the investigative beat, but just last April, he wrote a story about the State Racing Commission. He reported on the governor's latest appointment to the commission, a position of some influence in Arizona. It was a man named Kemper Marley, a wealthy liquor dealer. After the Bolles article, which pointed to certain conflicts of interest, Marley resigned. Police are also investigating a certain sequence of events involving this man, Neil Roberts, a prominent Phoenix attorney, a dog breeder, and a friend of John Adamson.
What kind of man's John Adamson? You hear a lot of stories. You hear he was a kind of a roughneck, tough guy.
I've never even heard him utter a profane word. He's a colorful character, a Damon Runyon type character. A guy that loved dogs and loved his child. And certainly in his relationships with me and around this household, he'd been nothing other than a gentleman. Colorful, humorous, pleasant guy.
A killer?
No.
Roberts told police that Adamson was with him the morning of the bombing, but he's not sure what time Adamson left.
Well, I've forgotten, quite honestly, the time, but about in the morning anyway.
And the bomb went off in Don Bolles' car. I think it was 11:34, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
The evening of the day of the bombing, Roberts arranged a private plane to fly Adamson to Lake Havasu, 130 miles away. He claims Adamson was in fear of his life. The day after the explosion, Roberts says he received a visit from Max Dunlap, a wealthy Arizona sportsman. Dunlap, he said, was trying to raise $25,000 for the defense of Adamson, and this before Adamson had even been arrested. In giving this information to police, Roberts asked for and received limited immunity from prosecution. Dunlap denies trying to raise money for Adamson's defense. He says it was Roberts' idea to raise defense money. He does admit passing on $5,000 to Adamson that he says a stranger gave him to help Adamson. Dunlap is a close friend and business associate of the same Kemper Marley that Bolles had reported on last March. Marley says he gave Dunlap $5,000, but for some machinery. A couple of things that should be remembered about Phoenix. It's been described as the nation's biggest small town. It may have indeed grown from a cowboy hamlet into a metropolis almost overnight. But with all those big city pretensions, with the breathtaking sweep of fancy hotels and skyscrapers and golden suburbs, Phoenix remains a small town. And like all small towns, it has its grand alliances. Merchants, ranchers, and lawyers, who it's generally acknowledged wield a great deal of power within the state. Men who do not hold public office, yet are able to maintain a climate favorable to their enterprises, and have been able often to keep the lid on investigations.
Has the lid been on in Phoenix and Arizona? The answer is yes.
Arizona's Attorney General, Bruce Babbitt.
What I mean by that is that there's been an atmosphere in this state for a long time of that anything that is done by people wearing coats and ties goes. Anything that purports to be business is not to be critically examined. We're not going to get into it. State government exists for the purpose of facilitating business deals, not regulating them. And that the police are, in the criminal justice system, is there for the purposes of handling burglars and people who carry guns.
Don Harris is the new county attorney in Phoenix, placed in the job after his predecessor departed under a cloud of suspicion.
We have corruption in this town. We have organized crime moving in. But organized crime doesn't just move into an area. You have to have some type of decay from within for them to start feeding on. And that decay from within has been here in this town. Otherwise, organized crime couldn't have come in and made their deals. Because you find some of the big old-time names cropping up with the sleazy people. But they maintain a high-profile image of goodness, civic community pride. And so they don't have jail records. But these are the people that disturb me. They always talk about our Italian enemies, you know, the Mafia and everything, and I'm sure there are some of those around, but they don't disturb me as much as the Joneses and the Smiths with the good old Anglo-Saxon names. I think those are some of the people we ought to start looking at and worrying about. We know what the Mafia is doing. We've got a lot of intelligence on them, but nobody's been looking too closely at the other side.
And you think there's something to find?
There's a lot to find.
But then you go from there to murder.
The Don Bolles case, an unfortunate incident. I know everybody in your media, newspaper and TV men, must get a little twinge when they turn on their car if they're working in any sensitive areas. You work in sensitive areas. When is some local hood going to say, I've had enough of Morley Safer and his land fraud investigations on national TV?
Do you think they'll ever get the people who conspired to do this?
God, I hope so.
But do you think they will? Are they too well protected?
I don't know. I just don't know. I just can't stand right now to think that they will not.
Don Bolles, I feel, was killed because he was getting on to a local figure of some local consequence. I do not believe it was a figure of national consequence at this time. I definitely believe some vested interests, people who had a lot of money in the community and were old-timers in Arizona, were being looked into, and they could not stand the heat. A national politician is used to heat. You know, they get it if they're conservatives from the liberal press, if they're liberals, they're getting it from the conservative press, and they learn how to live with the slings and arrows. A guy who is a local powerhouse, who's never been exposed as a local powerhouse, and has having his hands into a multitude of things that maybe he should not be there, he can't take that heat. And I think this is what resulted in Don Bolles' murder. The gentleman that's charged with it, I think, is an important figure. Of course, he was involved, we feel, in the homicide, and he partook in it, and he set Don up. What I want now are the other 5, 6, 10, or whatever number it is, who paid the money to have it done, and the guys that pressed the button. And we are on to that right now. I mean, today, we are on to that. We have been approached with information from certain figures who want to trade off lighter sentences for putting somebody into the death house. And understandably so, this is a death penalty case. I do not like terrorism. I don't like it when hostages are held on airplanes. I don't like it when people are kidnapped. This was done as a gesture to the news media to stop looking into this community. And I resent that. This is my community. I resent it as a citizen, I resent it as a lawyer, and I resent it as a prosecuting attorney. Bolles was done in the way he was to make an example. He was not shot like Ed Lazar by a professional. He was not taken out in the desert and left as a professional might do, or even a bungler. The manner in which Don was disposed of and murdered was done to stick it in the community space. And I want those people that ordered it done. You can always get a punk to do your work for you. I'm tired of the punks. I want the guy that walked in and said, I want Don Bolles murdered, here's X amount of dollars to do it. He is the guy that's always remained clean and behind the scenes. And I'd love to have that guy, and I'm going to do everything in my efforts to get that guy before I leave this office.
Tomorrow, a group of 18 investigative reporters representing 15 newspapers across the country arrive in Phoenix to begin an investigation into murder and corruption in Arizona. They'll be helped by 300 student volunteers for what may be the biggest single journalistic investigation ever undertaken.
Don Bolles is a 47-year-old investigative reporter for the Arizona Republic. He's been working on a series about the Mafia. Today, as he attempted to start his car, a bomb went off. Tonight, Bolles is in critical condition, fighting for his life. Before he lapsed into unconsciousness, he blamed the Mafia and named a suspect.
Don Bolles, the Phoenix reporter who was murdered while trying to expose crooked land sales, was buried today. Sharon Lovejoy reports.
For years, Don Bolles had worked as an investigative reporter for the Arizona Republic. He had won awards for his stories on government corruption, mafia infiltration of racetracks, of land fraud involving organized crime. The people here say that is why he was killed. He may have known too much. Bolles had given up investigative reporting 8 months ago, saying the work was too frustrating. There had been threats on his life. But a telephone call lured him here to the Hotel Clarendon June 2nd. An informant had promised to meet him here with information he claimed linked Senator Barry Goldwater and Congressman Sam Steiger to an Arizona land fraud scheme. But the man never arrived, and when Bolles started to drive out of the hotel parking lot, his car exploded. Critically injured, Bolles gasped 4 words to bystanders: Mafia, Emprise, the name of a New York sports concessionaire which once owned a piece of 6 dog racing tracks here, and John Adamson, the man Bolles later identified from a hospital bed as his informant. When Bolles died Sunday afternoon, after the amputation of both legs and 1 arm, Adamson was charged with his murder. Phoenix police know Adamson well. He's a man with a criminal record, and police say he has underworld associates. He's a gambler and breeder of racing dogs, friendly with Ned Warren, an Arizona real estate magnate who has been under investigation here for land fraud. Both Emprise and Ned Warren have been under close scrutiny by grand juries. It was Emprise money which bailed out an Arizona firm controlling 6 dog racing tracks. And in 1972, Emprise was convicted of conspiring to hide ties to underworld gambling interests in Nevada. Warren's name has been linked with organized crime for years. Edward Lazar, president of several of Warren's real estate companies, was gunned down last year, 1 day before he was to testify to a grand jury investigating his boss. And it was at Warren's request, say some sources, that Senator Barry Goldwater and Congressman Sam Steiger wrote letters back in 1971 endorsing the sale of nearly worthless Arizona land to U.S. servicemen. The scheme was later found to be illegal. Both Arizona Republicans say they had no idea the land deal wasn't legitimate. Police say there will be more arrests in the Bolles murder case and more grand jury investigations into organized crime in Arizona. Sharon Lovejoy, CBS News, Phoenix.
Phoenix police say they would like to talk to Marley. However, no warrant has been issued for his arrest. Reliable investigative sources say that police do not have enough evidence at this time. However, one high-ranking police officer tells us that there is a good possibility that 2, perhaps 3 more individuals will eventually be charged in connection with the murder conspiracy. Bill Redeker, ABC News, Phoenix.
Why did you appoint him to the Racing Commission?
Is this the car here? No, it's over here. Where? Oh, we got it right in this car. That's
What contribution to your campaign?
None whatsoever, because my relationship with Mr. Marley is nil. Besides Mr. Marley, many other people have made contributions to my campaign. Therefore, he is not a friend of mine. He's a casual acquaintance. And I say the statement, repeat it again.
Are all the suspects now in custody?
I don't believe so.
What do you mean?
I believe there are other suspects.
How many more?
I believe at least 2 more.
What was their role?
In the role of helping to get the bomb gathered and putting it together and carrying out the crime, and then perhaps 2 more in the cover-up.
Do you think they'll be apprehended?
I hope so. It looks like the thing is starting to fall apart, which is important. And I've always stated, at best, the Attorney General's actions were not the best way to proceed, you know, if we would assume he was doing it for honest motives. So, at best, it was not the way to proceed, but
Why was it taken out of your office? What do you think is really behind the reason it was taken?
it was taken out of my office, I feel, because Mr. Babbitt did not want to pass up the opportunity to get the glory of the prosecution of the case and all the attendant circumstances surrounding it.
Why do you say that?
He's going to run for office. I wanted to pursue a course of negotiations with the defendant. I informed the chief of police about this. The case was then subsequently, within 2 hours, taken out of my office. The defense counsels, Mr. Friedel and Mr. Feldhacker, informed me thereafter in conference with the chief of police, as well as Mr. Turoff of my office, that Mr. Schaefer told them that if they were to try and make an agreement with the county attorney, Donald Harris, the case would be out of my office within 1 hour before the ink was dry on the...
What's your connection with the murder?
Do you have anything to say?